Hello, my name is Molly Sydnor. You can find me on Instagram at Molly Margaret Designer. I am a queer woman of color. I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I specialize in fiber art, specifically weaving and rug design is kind of how I've made my career here in Dallas. But I have evolved and kind of always toyed with a little bit of everything. I like to paint, I like to draw, anything textile, anything texture, mixed media type stuff. In 2015, I graduated from the Maryland Institute College of Art, and I started as a photo major because in high school I did a lot of drawing and painting, pretty standard. And so when I got to college, I switched to photo. I wanted my major to be photography, painting and photography, but I'm really driven by hand processes. And so once I got through the photography department and a lot of the courses, I realized that kind of everything is turning digital. And I took a couple fiber courses and I switched my major right before my senior year. So it was like everything just kind of flipped and I switched to fiber. So after college, I came to Dallas for a rug designing position, and I've pretty much just been doing fiber ever since. So my first ever weaving was a caricature of Dwight Schrute from The Office, and it's by far I love this installation, but my Dwight is my favorite thing that I've ever made. It's very creepy, it's so weird, it's super like beginner and everything, but it's super unique. And that's the rundown on me.
Okay, what is your mission / passion as an artist?
So as an artist, in college I was always jealous because I would look at other people's work and I would kind of articulate their concepts, and everybody's work was so unique to them, and everybody's work was so recognizably them. Like I had a lot of friends who I could look at the work and I could match it to the artist, and I always knew whose stuff was what because of how unique their style was. And I felt like part of me, because I was doing so many different things and working with so many different mediums, part of me felt really upset that I didn't have a set style, and I didn't understand my artistic voice. And then my roommate and I were kind of talking about, we were more or less discussing that kind of conversation about the style of an artist and the recognizability of an artist. And I just remember complaining to her about how I was feeling that my work wasn't personal to me, and her jaw like hit the floor, and she was like, oh my God, you have a very distinct style. Like your work, your concept, it's always about the body, it's always about you. It's more or less a reflection of you. And I think that you might not realize you have a style, but it's in the concept, and you can tell. And she just kind of explained that maybe I couldn't see it, but other people could. And so ever since that conversation, that was probably, 2013 that we had that conversation. And ever since then, I've just kind of gone off of that, and my work has always been about the body. It's always been about identity. And so I've been learning a lot about my identity ever since I left. So ever since I left home, really. I grew up in Wisconsin. It was a super white town. And I'm biracial. My dad's black, I'm half black. Actually, I'm not half black, I am black. But the conversations along that are often confusing, and for me, there's a certain sense of imposter syndrome that I've had to go through with life. And then moving to Baltimore for art school, Baltimore's a very black city. And so I went from a super white town looking like this not really person who fit in. I didn't really fit into any boxes there, but people didn't see me as black, but they also didn't see me as white. And so then when I moved to Baltimore, all of a sudden I was this white girl who was actually black, and it was just this super weird, like out of body identity crisis that I didn't learn till later on is actually called Imposter Syndrome. and I didn't realize that I had been code switching on and off throughout my whole life. So then I moved to Dallas, and it was like this opportunity to just be me, and I learned how to be the reflection of myself that I wanted to be, instead of having the reflection of myself always count on other people's perception of me. And then all of a sudden I started realizing that I was also queer. So in my bisexuality, I don't know, sometimes I don't necessarily like to say bisexuality because that gets confusing, but there's a lot of parallels between being biracial and being bisexual, and that is the epitome of my work. My work is about identity, gender, race, sexuality. It's fun and it's in your face, enjoyable, but then there's these underlying messages that I want people to understand. So when you look at me, you're looking at the shell of who you think I am, right? So I straight pass, I white pass, I pass for somebody that I'm actually not. And so that's kind of what my work is. In a way, it passes as this fun, cartoonish, enjoyable thing that's innocent, and then you kind of immerse yourself in it and amongst it, and you start to realize, oh, this is sexualized, and oh, this is very adult, and there's these underlying messages that kind of go into play with all of my artwork. And if you want to see it and ignore all of the details, and if you want to ignore the underlying messages, I think that there's a lot of people that go through life doing that. So it's kind of a reflection on life as well. So I really think that my work, if you sit with it long enough, you'll start to learn, and throughout life we have to educate ourselves constantly. And so that's kind of how my work is. Like if you're looking at my work and you just read a book by a Black author talking about Black things, you might come into my work with a completely different perception than you had before that book. Like it's all about educating yourself and sitting with things for a little longer to find the underlying messages. So that was a super long-winded description, but I don't think I've been reading a lot, and I'm working on writing some things out, and so I think that was the first time I've really sat with the things that I've been learning too, because I mean we all have to continue learning, and a lot of times we don't have the words for stuff that we want to say until we have the words for them. So I do feel kind of glad that I was able to get that out. It feels good.
Tell us about your installation. How did you create the concept?
So for the longest time, well, specifically as a rug designer, I've been going to Art Basel and seeing different installs that incorporate rug as a floor covering, but also as a wall covering. And then I went to this really cool exhibition. Well, you know, honestly, I don't even know if I would call it an exhibition. Okay, that's a little pretentious. It was an exhibition. It was just really, it was in a warehouse. It was thrown together. It was like a pop-up, and it was like floor to ceiling in a small room. You kind of immersed yourself into this environment. And so that was kind of the first time I said, I really want to make a weaving that's on the floor, on the ceiling, and on the walls. And so that's kind of been churning in the back of my mind for quite a few years, honestly, probably the last 4 years. And so I've been working with, so let's like put that's compartmentalized, right? And so I've been working with, so last year I had a residency, and I was working with like little kid drawing style. So I was making these illustrations of women in spaces, like interiors, and the exhibition was called Adult Like, and it was kind of supposed to be mirroring how whimsical childhood is, and how we, when we're little, we can draw, and cartoons are so ambiguous because you want to like see yourself as the cartoon. So like, if a cartoon is super simplified, it's easier for you to put yourself into that cartoon. And so I was kind of putting myself into these worlds, but then I was also trying to combine, not hypnotics, but a little bit of like euphoria, where it's like dreamlike and everybody on Instagram has these like Pinterest level lifestyles, and these 22-year-old models are like sitting in these $1 million mansions, and like that's not real, right? Like they were paid to sit there. That's not their real house, right? And so I was kind of just trying to get people to picture themselves in these like euphoric rooms and spaces full of plants. And so I was working with those ideas, and then when I wrote the concept for Temporal Jungle, I was working with memory, because our temporal lobes in our brains store the memory. And so I was working with the adult-like themes, mixing childhood and adulthood, and trying to find like the duality between the two. And so I really wanted to make a playground that brought together these things from childhood. But then, I don't know about you guys, but when I was young, I was super sheltered, and like little white lies were told when people didn't want like me to lose my innocence, or didn't want me to know that something was sexualized, for example. Like the game of Twister, right? You can play the game of Twister as kids and you're all interwoven and it's fun and it's funny, but then like when you get as adults, it becomes like sexualized. And so it was kind of like a coming of age, but also mixing adult concepts with child concepts, but also thinking about how keeping your innocence and telling a white lie to have somebody keep their innocence kind of influences the rest of their life. So this whole installation, I can like show around. So I knew I wanted to do a playground, and I knew I wanted to pull together things from my childhood and my experience as a childhood, and then bring it into my adulthood. And so if you kind of, the floor is in this triangular sectionalized colors. And I don't know if you guys did this in gym class, but we had this really big parachute that we would all like grab a handle and pull up, and then we'd pull down, and like it would like mushroom around us. And so that's kind of like, the floor is supposed to emulate a little bit of that, but then it's all sectioned off by color. And obviously the underlying message of that is like LGBTQIA+, because of the rainbow aesthetic. But then if you kind of look at just sections, so we have this wall. Oh, and then it's also all optical, because it's supposed to play with your mind, because you're supposed to be like in and out of your train of thought. You're supposed to be dreaming, you're supposed to be remembering, you're supposed to be wondering what's real and what's not. Like if you've ever looked at a photograph of yourself and then thought about that photograph years later, do you actually remember being in that setting, or are you remembering the photograph? Are you remembering what people are telling you? So the optical part is supposed to kind of mess with your vision, so you're not really supposed to know like what you're seeing, if it's real, if it's not. So when we get to this wall, these are supposed to be like a jumbo version of, like at the dentist's office, they have these little wire mazes. And I just remember hating the dentist, but it was the only place where I could play with the wire maze, the wire bead maze or whatever. So I made like a jumbo version of that, because again, in dreams, it's like things are too big and things are too small. So it's kind of going off of that. But then of course, like I brought the ceiling down, because the ceiling in this room was so high. I was just like, I wanted people to really feel not trapped, but almost just like condensed. Like I wanted the room to feel smaller. So then we've got this section. This is one of my favorite sections, because it's kind of interesting, because I went to art school, but I grew up in Wisconsin, and I grew up going to Madison. My dad played college football, so we were like a big football family. I grew up thinking that college was like Big Ten, like beer pong all the time, like party, party, party. And then I went to art school, and I don't think I played beer pong except when I came home to Wisconsin. So it's kind of like carnival, like if you are a kid and you're going to the carnival games. A lot of the carnival games, I feel like they're either they inspired drinking games or drinking games inspired them. I'm not really sure which came first. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg. But this wall's supposed to be like beer pong, right? So I've got the kid version with the pom-pom, and then I've got the adult version with the beer pong, ping pong ball. So this is supposed to be like, obviously I didn't play beer pong like I said. Yeah, so this is supposed to be like beer pong, but it's childlike, right? So it kind of, you can flip it. But then this is hoop toss. So you can throw the hoops here. And actually the really interesting part about this exhibition is I knew that I wanted it to be super interactive, and I knew I wanted people to play with it and touch it and just like put themselves in it, but I'm also very aware that things break. So these all were actually blue to match this wall to kind of bring back and forth the optical illusory playness. But you know, spray paint doesn't really stick very well. But I think rainbow kind of suits this wall anyway, so that's that. And then I wanted to do the monkey bars because my favorite memory is monkey bars from when I was a kid. But when I tried to do monkey bars as an adult, I just completely wiped out, couldn't do it. But also there's like an element of CrossFit. So these monkey bars are very tall and almost supposed to be, you're almost not supposed to be able to do them. Like you are if you can reach, but they're so extreme. Monkey bars are usually a little bit smaller and more doable. So that's the green section and the yellow section kind of combine. And then we've got, so this wall is kind of a pair, the orange and the red. And so this wall is supposed to be kind of like Twister. So these were supposed to be jumbo dice, but I got a little weave happy and wove them giant. And since I work in the rug industry, I've also made giant poofs for people's interiors. So they kind of mimic a poof. So a lot of people have been sitting on them, which people are gonna do whatever, that's fine. But this wall was supposed to be kind of like a Twister. It's not really, it fits the theme of Sweet Tooth. Like the theme is intangible, right? So you're not really supposed to touch intangible. So I made it so that the Twister is almost like not doable. But then the people who run Sweet Tooth collaborated with me, and we had a lot of discussions, and we talked about, instead of having Twister be on the floor, how about we make it go up the wall? And I had an element of rock climbing pieces that I wanted to add. So that's kind of the idea behind the rock climbing pieces, is that it's supposed to be like Twister that you could do up the wall. And then we've got this section, the pink section, and it's more or less the idea that you can climb it, but it's not really doable. So that's the pink section. And then in the center, we have, so up there is a fun hoop, or that's what it's called. I think it's called a fun hoop. I've Googled it a million times. It's a fun hoop. We had these fun hoops on our playground. I don't know if it's just a Midwestern thing, but, so the fun hoop, there's the holes, and you're supposed to throw the hoop. It's like basketball almost. You're supposed to throw the hoop, or throw the ball into the hoop, and then it's supposed to come out one of the holes. And no one ever played it. No one ever had a ball that could fit. It's supposed to be like kind of the dodgeball, the Nerfy, like a basketball wouldn't fit. So we never knew how to play it. But what people would always do when we were kids is people would go like swing on the pole that was attached to the fun hoop. So the kids used to swing on the pole, which I always thought was interesting when I have my memories on that. There was also a lot of people that could do that thing where you like, I'm not gonna attempt to try it, but they like do this and then they go completely perpendicular. I mean, it's wild, people would do that. But then as I started getting older, specifically in college, I had a couple friends who worked at the strip club, and I attempted to get a job to work at the door and like cocktail and stuff. I was trying to be a bartender, and so I ended up getting a job at the Hustler Club with my friend, and I'm this like goody-goody, and I told my parents and they got really upset with me. And so I just have this memory of like strip club culture being something that I can't do, that I can't be part of, and there was almost like this innocence that my parents still wanted me to have, yet like not. And then the more and more I've gotten older and learned about, specifically from my friends, but learned about the culture, the more I realized that strip clubs are really queer, and a lot of queer women are strippers. And I don't know, I'm just like, I'm really trying to, with this installation, but also with the more that I'm learning and educating myself, I'm learning about things that I don't necessarily know and things that I don't necessarily identify with. So as much as I'm wondering why people aren't necessarily understanding that I'm half Black or not necessarily understanding queerness, there's a certain part of me that isn't understanding of things that I don't know and I don't know about. So specifically with sex workers, I am attempting to support them by donating, but also hearing them and listening and learning and evolving and growing from what they're saying. But that also falls into all of the other stuff. Like there's, so I'm not disabled, but I have a heart condition. And so I've kind of been learning about how to talk around, how to talk about it, how to talk around it, and involve it and include it, because there's a lot of things in the margins and in the minorities that don't get brought attention to. And so again, like with my work, it's all about my personal identity, but I also am aware that I don't want to leave things out. And so like with my childhood innocence, it only made sense that there was a giant, you know, this is almost supposed to kind of be like a stage, but it's also kind of supposed to be like the way to tie all the work together. And actually it's really, there's a little bit, I'll tell you a little bit of a sneak secret. So when I first did this installation, I divided everything in half. And so if you want to like bring the camera. So I envisioned the pole to be directly down the half and line up perfectly in between the green and the yellow. But then we realized that there was this like big hole up there and we couldn't do that. So that's kind of why we added the stage, and then we made it asymmetrical. Not only because the asymmetrical part of it matches the optical illusion part and the push-pull part, but that was actually something that I had to work around. So I always think that's really interesting that the stage is like one of my favorite parts, and it's because of something that I couldn't control. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot in this installation that I couldn't necessarily control, but I mean, in the end, I think it turned out pretty well. So yeah, that's a lot about the install.
And go.
So I think with time and growth and honestly like acceptance and just like, again, further learning, I've always used art as my way to express myself, but also more or less figure things out in my brain and figure out how things work. So with every art project comes lots of reading and lots of development and conversations with people, a lot of different perspectives than mine. And so there's I mean, I think even in the video that we just shot now, there was times where I corrected myself. And I think that's kind of what I want to bring with my work, is these honest conversations where there's room for error, but also there's room for growth and learning and expanding. And I think that art is a really, like, I know a lot of people are intimidated by art and intimidated by artists, but I think once we can look past the intimidation factor, I think it's a really great way to open conversations and have open dialogue about all sorts of different things. And so specifically with Temporal Jungle, it has these very specific views on childhood and adulthood, and it's all related directly to me, and it's all very personal to me. But the point of this whole install is that you're supposed to come in as the viewer and see it from your perspective. So if this wall doesn't mean maze, wire maze, bead maze to you, what does it mean to you? Because it doesn't have to be what I say it is. So also, like, you know, if this is a fireman's pole to you, that's a fireman's pole to you. That's what you want it to be, right? If the rock climbing walls, if that reminds you of like a horror story where you fell off a rock climbing wall, like I want all of that to be brought into this exhibition, and specifically with like the conversations around the exhibition, it's supposed to be about your memory and your experience, even though it's made from my perspective. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it.